Okay, Pat, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Hanley. I'm the main research assistant and personal assistant for Mrs. Edmund McCormick, also known as Suzanne McCormick, who is the widow of Edmund J. McCormick, and she's the one that has been fighting valiantly the system and going after Bankers Trust Company, a nominated executor in her husband's will. However, they're not named on the letters of authorization, the permanent letters testamentary, and their law firm, White and Case.
Okay, so you're getting. I was just trying to get an introduction.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
You're too soft.
yeah, if you could project yourself a little bit more, that'd be better. Okay, so basically, Suzanne, what year was it that her husband passed away?
Her husband died in November of 1988.
Okay, and Suzanne, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, for one thing, that was very upsetting is that my husband was ill for 4 years, and just briefly, Bankers Trust and White and Case were after his estate. Basically, they came to this home several times to go over the will. But when he was ill, he was in a coma the last week, and I was by his bedside, of course, and I had written after he passed away, I wrote White and Case and said, what happened? There's $1.5 million that disappeared in an account. And they wrote me back, and they finally they said, well, on November 23rd, it was withdrawn and the account was closed. Well, my husband was in a coma on November 23rd. He died on November 27th, so of course they made a mistake giving the date. But it wasn't in the final accounting. So
that's what got you started on.
Well, it got me suspicious.
Suspicious that something's not right with the.
Well, I didn't
being a beneficiary to the will.
Right.
So, but basically, the estate was worth how much?
Well, after the funeral, there was the stepchildren were there, my stepchildren, and they said they had gone up to the Winthrop Rutherford, who was at the reception, who was the attorney who drafted the will, and they said, what was our father really worth, approximately? He said, oh, I don't know, 43 to 45 million maybe.
Okay, now Pat, you think it was worth more?
Well, according to a statement of worth that was executed approximately 4 months prior to the date of death, that Bankers Trust Company gave us, it lists a gross at 37 and a net at 24 million. In questioning Mr. Rutherford on a taped telephone call, Mr. Rutherford was asked, well, why did you put it in with the IRS at 17 million or 16 million? And he said, well, we did it to save taxes, which is absurd because of the fact that a full marital deduction was taken. So there were no taxes paid on over half of the estate, according to the IRS Form 706, which is the estate tax form.
All right, so we're talking about the how much is in the estate.
Well, the value was all over the place, but the documents clearly indicated that, according to the net worth statement that White and Case, that Bankers Trust Company, had in their files, and was a standard thing that they did approximately every 6 months, apparently, with the help of Mr. McCormick's accountant, who is an executor, Herman Markowitz, a CPA, and the bank. They put this document together so they could update his assets and then be in a position to deal with his estate when they he died.
What was CBT's role?
CBT, who was
I mean, what's the bank? I'm sorry.
Bankers Trust Company.
Yeah, BT.
BT.
BTC.
No, okay, Bitco. Bitco.
Okay. What was their role in this whole
Well,
exercise? I mean, they were controlling the will.
Bankers Trust Company was listed in the will and nominated in the will as an executor of the estate, and also as a trustee of a trust that was set up in the will for the benefit of Suzanne. Suzanne was the main beneficiary of the estate and of the trust. Bankers Trust Company was nominated, as I said. However, when the temporary letters were issued in December of 1988 and on January 25th of 1999, when the permanent letters were issued by the Surrogate Court of Westchester County, in both cases, the name that appears on the letters is Bankers Trust Company of New York. And I have an exemplified copy of those letters, so basically that is a judge saying that this is a certified copy.
Okay, so basically, to cut to the chase, what's the problem with that?
The problem with that is Bankers Trust Company of New York was not a nominated executor, number one. Actually, that's not the main point. The main point is, as of January 25th of 1999, there was no entity known as Bankers Trust Company of New York. Bankers Trust Company of New York did not become a legal entity or an entity, period, until September the 7th of 1999, over 10 years later. And the reason they created that entity was to take the approximately 2,500 trusts and estates that Bankers Trust Company had and could no longer handle due to the fact that they were convicted federal felons. And they were convicted on July 27th of 1999. And they had to transfer everything into a non-criminal entity. A felon cannot be a fiduciary in the state of New York.
But just because they transferred it doesn't necessarily get them off the hook for those felons. I mean, it is basically the same company. It's just a name change, right?
I agree with you, but the way the law is set up, apparently, they are able to
avoid liability.
They're in a position to do a shell game, and basically that's what they've done. And we're getting.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna free. Okay, Susan. So when you heard about this, what was your reaction? About the fact that the bank had changed its name and was seemingly trying to maintain jurisdiction on your will?
My first reaction was, well, we have to have definite proof. We have to know what we're talking about because they're going to say it's New York State or something else. So Patrick did extensive research, and we had to wait for replies and certified copies, and it was quite an ordeal to get the total proof on this, but we got it.
Okay,
and,
so what did you come up with, Pat? What kind of documents?
Well,
something to show me?
Yes, what we came up with was documents that from the banking department, now known as the Financial Services Department, the long form certificates, because what they do is they've indicated that Bankers Trust Company was formerly known as, on recorded documents they've stated that Bankers Trust Company was formerly known as Bankers Trust Company of New York, and the certificate issued by the Banking or Department of Financial Services clearly state that it never was. In other words, it states that Deutsche Bank Trust Company Americas was originally filed in 1903 under the title of Bankers Trust Company, and during the interim period between 1903 and the present was never known by any other and by any other name.
So why didn't the judge see through that?
Because the judge is in a very bad position because of the fact that the documents were issued, some of the documents were issued by the court, by the surrogate court of Westchester County, which clearly they're involved in this criminal enterprise, in that they've aided and abetted the bank and their attorneys. That includes White and Case and Winthrop Rutherford, of White and Case, and Pillsbury Winthrop, which is represented by E. Leo Malonis, the former chief administrative judge for the state of New York, and David Kiko, along with others. Their problem is if they change the records, they'll have to indicate their involvement and their complicity in this. There was no entity prior to September of 1999, specifically September the 7th of 1999, when they created Bankers Trust Company of New York to take over the trusts and estates of Bankers Trust Company, the convicted federal felon. And they changed the name. They had an entity known as Deutsche Bank Trust Company New York, which was an entity that was started on March 14th. Excuse me, let's cut to the chase, I'm sorry. Deutsche Bank Trust Company New York was filed in 1995, April the 10th of 1995. And they were under the title of Deutsche Bank Trust Company.
Okay, and so what year are we talking about where this will dispute was going on?
Well, the will dispute basically started in the late 1990s, and the reason was because Mrs. McCormick was not getting answers to questions, and the stepchildren were writing letters and they wouldn't answer them. Both the law firm and the bank would not respond. And then we began to put together a group, and the group included the stepchildren, and we wrote letters and they began to respond at that point. However, it was a very slow, tedious process to gather this information. They weren't giving up anything.
Right, well, I was just trying to get the date of the case in perspective to the date for which the second, the change of name for the bank occurred.
The change of
Legally,
the letters testamentary were issued by the permanent letters testamentary were issued by the surrogate court of Westchester County, and they were issued on January 25th of 1989. They were issued to 5 entities, 4 individuals, and Bankers Trust Company of New York. The 4 individuals were nominated in the will. However, Bankers Trust Company of New York was not nominated in the will. It was Bankers Trust Company. It was a fraudulent entity that was listed on the letters testamentary.
It became a legal entity in '99.
Okay, Susan. So this was your first run-in with how the judges abuse the law?
Well, yes. I mean, of course, you know, most people, I think, who haven't been through this kind of ordeal, you trust these people as professionals, and you trust the judicial department. I mean, I think the judicial system, I think most people do. But as you learn more, you wonder what in the world is going on when you don't get justice.
Okay, how much of that, of the total estate do you think was due you? I mean, it started with missing $1.5 million, as you said before, on closing of the account. But how much do you think was really due you?
Well, the IRS, when we went there to look at their documents, the agent said to me, he said, "Did you get your 11 million?" And I looked at him. I said, "No, I didn't get anything." He said, "What? What do you have to live on?" So I mean, that was basically, I guess, initially the amount. I was supposed to get, half. It was divided in two parts, the residual estate and the outright gifts I got, which were
So where is that money?
Well, that's a good question. That's what we've been fighting for
how many years?
18 years.
18 years, just to find out where the money went.
Well, I mean, they mishandled it, obviously, but they try to talk around all this. But if you pin it all down and go into the whole bucket of worms, they mishandled it in many ways.
And you're a widow victim.
Yes.
From lawyers and corrupt judges. Would you say that's correct?
I would say that's correct.
Okay, Pat, do you want to add to that?
Well, yes, there are other issues beyond the fraudulent letters testamentary. And the other issue is a very good friend of ours by the name of Ralph Martinelli, who has gone on to his reward and resting peacefully, I hope, was a publisher of newspapers here in Westchester, and he approached the Judge Albert Emanuele, in 1996, and spoke to the judge about Edmund J. McCormick, who was a friend of his from Yonkers. And he spoke to him, and Judge Emanuele agreed to look at the file, which was approximately 1.5 inches thick at that point. Now it's hundreds of boxes. And they had lunch and several other meetings, and Judge Emanuele told Ralph Martinelli there were two things wrong with the estate. And he told him that the first thing was that in early February of 1989, shortly after the permanent letters were issued in January, Bankers Trust Company was owed approximately $500,000 from Mr. Edmund McCormick, Suzanne's husband, with a line of credit. And White and Case, who had been anointed as the estate attorney in December of 1988, 2 months prior, they filed a petition with the surrogate court for repayment of the monies. And there was approximately $7 million liquid at that point, so it was no problem getting their money. Judge Emanuele told Mr. Martinelli that once that petition was filed, Bankers Trust Company, White and Case, abandoned the estate of Edmund J. McCormick in favor of their enduring client, Bankers Trust Company. And there is a court order reflecting the fact that the payment was made to them. So Judge Emanuele said the estate had no legal representation from the end of February, beginning of March, when the court order was issued. Of 1989.
Meaning there was a mistrial?
No, there was no mistrial. There was no trial. The estate had no legal representation, according to Judge Emanuele. And in May of 1996, White and Case, Bankers Trust Company, insisted on paying White and Case a partial payment of $250,000 towards their legal bill, the estate's legal bill, allegedly. And Suzanne wrote and spoke very strongly against it, and Mr. William Wilkie, the administrative head of the trust department, a managing director of Bankers Trust Company, wrote and said, "We have the votes, we're going to pay them." Well, actually, they were taking estate money from the estate of Edmund J. McCormick, and they were paying their attorney, White and Case's legal bill, because White and Case was representing them, not the estate of Edmund J. McCormick.
Right. Now, Susan, you were willing to, they had come to you and said there was a bill of about $120,000. Is this the same incident?
No.
That doesn't have to do with this.
This was another. All right, never mind that then.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna. Okay, so we were talking about this lawyer fee for $250,000 that they paid themselves.
Well, effectively, they did pay themselves because they got their enduring client, Bankers Trust Company, Mr. Wilkie, the managing director of Bankers Trust Company, to assure that they received their $250,000. And actually, they weren't entitled to it because they were acting solely as the attorney for Bankers Trust Company. They abandoned the estate in February or March of
By doing so, that's what makes it so you don't owe them any money.
Well, no. In fact, not only it was a fraudulent transaction, it was criminal fraud, I believe, but that's yet to be decided. But basically, they were not entitled to the money because they didn't represent the estate. They were representing solely Bankers Trust Company. They had abandoned the estate, and a judge told Ralph Martinelli that. Now, the second thing, he refused to tell him. Now, this was in 1996, and he refused to tell him, and Ralph told him, he said, look, you're going to run for re-election and I'm going to come against you if you don't tell me. And he tried to buy Ralph off by giving him legal ads from the court. And Ralph declined that. And when he ran in 2000 to be re-elected, he was running against Anthony Scarpino, the current surrogate judge. And Ralph came out and supported Judge Scarpino. But in 2004, or in early 2004, April or May, I discovered one morning early the original letters testamentary, the permanent ones that were issued with a serial number on it to Suzanne McCormick, and I looked at them, and I discovered that it listed the four individuals. Suzanne McCormick, it listed Eddie McCormick Jr., who was Suzanne's oldest stepchild, and it listed Al Howes, who was a partner in nursing homes in Florida, and it listed Herman Markowitz, the CPA, all as legal executors and nominated executors. And then it listed Bankers Trust Company of New York. And I put it down, and then I went back to it a minute or two later, and I said, wait a minute, hold it. Bankers Trust Company in New York didn't exist. Because I understood the entities at that point. And then I realized, and then I began the research of Bankers Trust Company of New York, getting all the documents.
That's when you found out that
it was a fraud.
Right.
It was a fraud. They had been.
But the judge didn't see the fraud.
The problem
perpetrated the crime.
The problem.
And which judge was this at this point?
It was Anthony Scarpino.
Okay.
And the problem is that Judge Scarpino worked for Bankers Trust Company. And when we discovered this, shortly after he was elected, in April or May of 2001, we demanded that he recuse himself. We spoke to the attorney, Mark Oxman, and we said, look, he worked for the bank, he's got to get out. He's got to disqualify himself.
And what happened?
And he refused. He said, Mark Oxman said he spoke to Judge Scarpino and he's not going to do it. So
and what's the ethics law on it?
Well, the ethics, the canons,
the appearance of impropriety?
The canons of judicial conduct indicate that it's the mere appearance of an impropriety. And later on, after over 2 years, it took us. In fact, this poster appeared in Newsday, the newspaper, on a Sunday on the front of the financial section of the paper.
Well, that's nice they covered it. How did you manage that?
And all great things happen by accident. And the picture appeared with Suzanne sitting with the signs, and he was given a copy of it. And when he was given a copy, he held a court hearing, and he said he didn't like it, but there was nothing he could do about it, and he'd entertain disqualification and recusal. And then that was in October of 2002, and he finally issued the order in February of 2003.
So here the media actually worked to get him to
partially, because what he did with his court order was he said that he had told us that he worked at the bank and wanted to know if anybody objected, which was a bold-faced lie, because he never told us. There's no proof in writing, on the record or off the record. He never issued any indication, and when we did discover it, he declined it, according to the attorney Mark Oxman, in writing, and Mark Oxman sent a letter to that effect. So Judge Scarpino can't have it both ways, and I know in another case a trial was held, and it was the Winstons of the Winston Jewelry Company, and the trial was held. Judge Scarpino presided at the trial, and for over 5 years he never indicated to them that he had been an employee of Bankers Trust Company, and he made decisions, he did things in the court, and then when the trial came along, the first words out of his mouth, literally, were, "I worked at the bank, does anyone have a problem with that?" At the beginning of the trial. And the trial went along, no one said a word, and the trial went along, and at the end of the trial he ruled against Bruce Winston, one of the sons of Harry Winston, the jeweler. And there was nothing they could do. They couldn't appeal anything because he had revealed it, that he was an employee. If somebody had objected...
But they didn't do that in your... Suzanne's case.
No, he took a different tack.
Right.
And I know that he has handled Bankers Trust cases, other cases, and in one case he held a trial and he never said a word to them about it. He never said a word to them.
So just to fight that, how much do you think it cost you in lawyer bills? Susan, do you know?
In legal bills, I don't know.
Just to fight that one thing. All right, Pat, do you know?
I have no.
I know one thing I can say here, is that we know someone and who also had me on TV, and had spoken to Judge Scarpino and said, "What happened to this woman's $24 million, this widow? What's going on? Why did this happen?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. She wanted to get rid of me." Well, of course I wanted to get rid of him because I saw that he was ruling against me, and we found out that he worked previously for Bankers Trust, so there's a conflict. So
it took you 2 years just to fix that one little thing.
It took him 2 years before he would do it. We had to finally get publicity.
Right. Well, the only thing that persuaded him to step down was the fact of the publicity, and that the whole world would know, and it wouldn't look good. And that's what these people are afraid of. They don't want to look bad.
Let's talk about the system. The problem with the system is, maybe in this case, is that you have a judge committing ethics violations. Well, and yet it doesn't reflect upon an actual case. You can't take that and say that the judge did wrong, he's responsible for messing up the case as a result of his illegal ethics violation, and there's no way to hold him accountable, would you say, other than the fact that finally 2 years later he did recuse himself?
Well, we can still file ethics violations or complaints.
But it won't reflect upon the original case.
It won't reflect upon the original case. But the problem is when you file complaints against the judges, or if you file with the department disciplinary committees, or the CJC, the Commission on Judicial Conduct, basically most of those complaints, if not all of them, are whitewashed. And Christine Anderson is a whistleblower who worked as a supervising attorney in the First Department Disciplinary Committee, and she blew the whistle and said they cover up, they whitewash. And then there's another one that Nicole Carolla, who also has said the same thing, and she was a witness in Christine Anderson's case, and she was threatened on the sidewalk, physically threatened. And what have they done? They've done nothing.
You know, it's difficult for the average citizen to, they do everything behind the curtains. So everything was prove it. And even if you can prove it, they talk around it. There's no way to get these people.
Well, there is
except to expose them with the truth.
That's it. Expose them to the public.
We have the proof. We have all the proof.
Suzanne McCormick received refund, Internal Revenue Service refund checks that were issued after her husband's death in November of 1988. And the checks were for prior tax years. And they totaled...
When he was living.
When he was living. And the checks were, 5 of them, they were totaling approximately $150,000. The bank and the law firm suggested strongly Suzanne should sign them over to the bank, and a receipt was given for them to Suzanne, which she has, and
I'd get my portion.
they told her that she would receive her portion of the check. They were made out to Edmund J. and Suzanne McCormick. Now, apparently the bank was able to get to the IRS, and a 6th check came. The 6th check was made out to tax refund check in the amount of $69,000. We have a copy of that check, and it was made out to Edmund J. and Suzanne McCormick refund check, tax refund check.
Okay, so where's the money going?
With Bankers Trust Company, also was listed on the check. That check does not appear in the accounting whatsoever, totally. Now, the checks were listed in the accounting, the 5 checks on the receipt. However, the amounts are all wrong. They are not the correct amounts that are listed on the receipt. In addition to that, they've stated in the accounting that those were refund checks for an individual, meaning Mr. McCormick, which is totally false. They have committed another fraud.
Right, well, right, falls under the False Claims Act, maybe, right?
Well, they've engaged in conversion, number one, and they've commingled the money. Now, they have stolen Suzanne McCormick's money. We've spoken to the IRS further, and there were 8 or 9 real estate partnerships.
Yeah, right.
We were given copies, after we asked, of partnership tax returns for these real properties located in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Florida. We went to the IRS and we asked them, gave them the identification numbers and the face pages of various copies of these tax returns, partnership tax returns. And they checked, and they said in writing that no tax returns were filed prior to the date of death. So all those tax returns that they gave us as valid tax returns are fraudulent. Now these people are engaged in fraud. What do you do?
Okay, fraud with the IRS.
Fraud with the IRS and the United States government.
How come the IRS isn't helping you with this?
Because it's like a black hole. You can go to government agencies, you can go to the Department of Justice, you can go to the FBI, you can go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and you document everything, you give it to them.
And you've done this.
And we have done this, and they don't even call you back. They don't even call you back. We've learned that you have to send everything certified mail so that you have a record, because if you call up, they say, we never got it. That's the first thing out of their mouth, we never got it. So everything has to go certified mail.
You
so
were
have
getting
a record.
movement with the FBI for a little while, and then they abandoned help.
Well,
What's the story on that?
there have been several attempts to...
I'm trying to signify a year, too. Give us a...
Well, the initial FBI was done probably in 2004 2005 or 6, and then we followed it up in 2008 with a formal complaint to the Public Corruption Unit in Manhattan. Ron Gardella is the chief FBI agent supervisor there, and at the time I believe Boyd Johnson was the assistant U.S. attorney. But they didn't want to touch it, and they sent it over to the regular FBI office.
Well, they recognized that there were illegalities at first, and they were appearing to wanting to help you.
They were interested, but then when they got into the politics of it, and this is what it all boils down to, in my opinion, the politics of it. No one wants to go up against White and Case, a bankers trust company, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and the Federal Reserve Bank, when the purchase of Bankers Trust Company took place in June of 1999, we had a source inside the Federal Reserve in April and May of '99, and they were pushing for Bankers Trust Company to be cleaned up. In other words, and one of the things they were going to clean up was